September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declare war on Germany. World War II has begun. Every history book starts here. But here is the question almost nobody asks. What if the war that started on September 1st, 1939 was already decided? Not in Berlin, not in London, not in Paris, but in Moscow. What if the decisions made by one man in one country between 1932 and 1941 made World War II not just possible, but inevitable? Not Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin. This is not a documentary that defends Hitler. Hitler started the war. Hitler ordered the invasions. Hitler signed the death warrants. This is a documentary about something more complicated, about how Stalin's decisions, made for his own reasons, in his own interests, cleared the road Hitler needed, destroyed the alliances that might have stopped him, handed him the strategic position that made Barbarossa possible, and then, when Germany attacked, nearly lost the war in the first 6 months because of decisions Stalin made in the years before the first German shell landed on Soviet soil. Was Stalin responsible for World War II? No. Was Stalin responsible for making it longer, wider, and more lethal than it might otherwise have been? The historical record makes a compelling case. June 11th, 1937. 8 of the most senior commanders of the Red Army are arrested, tried, and shot within a single 24-hour period. Not by the enemy, by their own government. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, the most innovative military thinker in the Soviet Union, the man who had studied German military doctrine and built the Red Army's armored and airborne forces, is among them. He is shot on the same day he is convicted. His trial lasts 1 day. The verdict is predetermined. The charges are fabricated. Tukhachevsky is not a German spy. He is not a traitor. He is a soldier who has spent his career building a Red Army capable of fighting the kind of modern war that is coming. He is shot because Stalin is afraid of him. The purge of the Red Army between 1937 and 1938 is one of the most strategically catastrophic decisions in the history of modern warfare. The numbers: 3 of 5 marshals of the Soviet Union shot, 13 of 15 army commanders shot or imprisoned, 50 of 57 corps commanders shot or imprisoned, 154 of 186 division commanders shot or imprisoned, 401 of 456 colonels shot or imprisoned. These were not political figures. They were soldiers, professionals who had spent decades learning how to fight. The Red Army that existed in June 1937 was one of the largest and most technically advanced in the world. Tukhachevsky had developed the concept of deep battle, an operational doctrine calling for simultaneous attacks across the entire depth of enemy defenses, using armor, airborne troops, and motorized infantry to collapse enemy positions faster than they could be reinforced. This doctrine was, in significant respects, ahead of German thinking at the time. By June 1941, 4 years after Tukhachevsky was shot, German armored columns would use virtually identical principles to destroy the Red Army in the opening weeks of Barbarossa. The man who had understood this was coming, and who had built the force to meet it, was dead, killed not by Germany, by Stalin. Why did Stalin do it? The answer historians have settled on is a combination of paranoia and political calculation. The military was the one institution in the Soviet Union with the organizational capacity, the weapons, and the trained personnel to remove him. Tukhachevsky, in particular, was enormously popular within the army. He was competent, charismatic, and politically independent. In Stalin's political arithmetic, These qualities made him a threat. The evidence used to condemn him was forged. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had fabricated documents suggesting Tukhachevsky was collaborating with Germany. The forgeries were passed to Stalin through Czechoslovak intelligence. Stalin used them as justification for arrests he had already decided to make. Germany had handed Stalin fake evidence to destroy his best general. Stalin used it. The consequences became visible immediately. In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War lasted 3.5 months. The Red Army, the largest in the world, fought a country of 3.7 million people and very nearly lost. Finnish forces killed or wounded an estimated 320,000 Soviet soldiers. The Red Army advanced approximately 70 miles. The performance was so poor that Hitler watched the Winter War and concluded the Red Army was finished as a fighting force. In his strategic planning for Operation Barbarossa, he estimated the campaign against the Soviet Union would be complete in 8 to 10 weeks. His estimate was based on what he saw in Finland. What he saw in Finland was an army whose best commanders were dead and whose survivors had been promoted 2 or 3 ranks above their competence to fill the gaps. Stalin's purge had not just killed individuals, it had destroyed institutional memory, the accumulated expertise of an officer corps that takes decades to build. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union partly because he believed the Red Army could not fight. He believed that because Stalin had shown him an army that could not fight. Stalin had shown him that army by shooting the men who had built it. August 23, 1939. 9 days before Germany invades Poland. In Moscow, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov sign a non-aggression pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. On its surface, Germany and the Soviet Union agree not to attack each other. Standard diplomatic language. The secret protocol attached to the pact is not standard diplomatic language. It divides Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Poland is divided between them. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, go to the Soviet sphere. Finland goes to the Soviet sphere. Romania's eastern territory goes to the Soviet sphere. Hitler gets everything west of an agreed line. Stalin gets everything east. 8 days later, Germany invades Poland from the west. 16 days after that, the Soviet Union invades Poland from the east. Poland ceases to exist. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is the single most consequential diplomatic decision of the interwar period, not because of what it said, because of what it made possible. Before the pact, Hitler faced a strategic problem that every German military planner since World War I had identified as potentially fatal: a two-front war. Germany's geography placed it between potential enemies to the east and to the west. In World War I, fighting simultaneously on both fronts had exhausted Germany to the point of collapse. Hitler needed to avoid that outcome. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact solved his problem. With Soviet neutrality guaranteed, with Stalin's signature on a document promising not to intervene, Hitler could move west with his full military force. He invaded Poland, he invaded Denmark and Norway, he invaded France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. France fell in 6 weeks. Britain was pushed off the continent at Dunkirk. The most powerful military alliance in Western Europe, the Anglo-French strategic relationship that had defeated Germany in World War I, was shattered in less than 2 months. Hitler could not have done this if he had faced the prospect of Soviet intervention. Stalin knew this Stalin had been warned. British and French diplomats had spent months in 1939 attempting to negotiate a collective security arrangement with the Soviet Union, a tripartite alliance that would have surrounded Germany with committed enemies on all sides. The negotiations failed. Historians continue to debate why. Part of the answer is British and French reluctance to make the full commitments Stalin demanded, including the right to move Soviet troops through Poland and Romania. Part of the answer is Stalin's own calculation. Stalin did not trust the British and French. He believed they wanted the Soviet Union and Germany to fight each other while the Western democracies watched from safety. He may have been right about their intentions. He was catastrophically wrong about the consequences of his alternative. What Stalin expected from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was time. Time to rebuild the Red Army after the purges. Time to expand Soviet territory as a buffer against future German attack. Time to industrialize and rearm. What he got was 18 months. In those 18 months, the Wehrmacht fought and won campaigns across 12 countries. It absorbed the industrial production of France, the Benelux countries, Scandinavia, and most of Eastern Europe. It gained combat experience fighting modern armies. Its commanders learned, adapted, and became more capable. The Red Army spent those same 18 months trying to rebuild an officer corps whose most experienced members were dead. When Germany attacked on June 22, 1941, it brought 153 combat-hardened divisions against an army that had shot its own generals. The buffer territory Stalin had gained from the Pact, eastern Poland, the Baltic states, parts of Romania, had been held for less than 2 years. The new defensive lines in that territory were not complete. The old defensive lines, abandoned when the new borders were established, had been partially dismantled. Stalin's buffer zone was not a defense. It was a killing ground. Between November 1940 and June 1941, Soviet intelligence delivered 84 separate warnings to Stalin that Germany was preparing to invade. 84 warnings from spies inside the German military, from diplomatic sources in Europe and Asia, from Britain, which had broken German signals intelligence, from Richard Sorge, the most effective Soviet spy of the war, operating from Tokyo, who provided the precise date of the invasion weeks in advance. Stalin dismissed all of them. He labeled the intelligence reports as British provocations, deliberate disinformation designed to drag the Soviet Union into a war with Germany. He told his intelligence chiefs that agents reporting German invasion preparations were working for the enemy. Some of those agents were recalled to Moscow. Some were arrested. The question historians cannot fully answer is whether Stalin genuinely believed Germany would not attack, or whether he knew an attack was coming and had no idea what to do about it. The evidence supports both interpretations. Stalin's communications in the months before Barbarossa show a leader who is simultaneously receiving warnings of imminent attack and issuing orders that suggest he expects peace to continue. In May 1941, Stalin gave a speech to graduating military officers in which he discussed the inevitability of war with Germany. He spoke of offensive operations. He spoke of the need for readiness. The same week, he issued orders preventing Soviet border forces from taking any action that might provoke Germany. Soviet soldiers on the western border were ordered not to fire even if fired upon without explicit authorization from Moscow. On the night of June 21, 1941, a German corporal deserted across the Soviet lines and told his captors that the invasion would begin in hours. The report was sent to Moscow. Stalin's response: the deserter was probably a plant, sent to provoke the Soviet Union into a preemptive action. 8 hours later, 3 million German soldiers crossed the border simultaneously. The first days of Barbarossa produced military disasters on a scale that had no precedent in modern warfare. In the first week, the German Luftwaffe destroyed approximately 4,000 Soviet aircraft, the majority of them on the ground, parked in neat rows at airfields that had not dispersed their planes despite the warnings. Soviet tank units encountering German armored columns fought without air cover, without artillery coordination, without functioning communication systems, because the communication infrastructure had been disrupted in the first hours of the attack. Soviet commanders sent radio messages that were not encrypted, using codes that German signals intelligence had already broken. In some sectors, Soviet commanders received no orders at all for the first 48 hours. They did not know what to do because they were waiting for instructions from a command structure that had been paralyzed by the shock of the attack. Stalin himself appears to have suffered a breakdown in the first days of the invasion. Members of the Politburo who went to his dacha on June 29th, a week after the invasion began, found him in a state that multiple witnesses described as shock and near paralysis. For approximately 10 days after Barbarossa began, the Soviet Union effectively had no functioning supreme commander. By the end of 1941, 6 months after the invasion, the Wehrmacht had advanced up to 1,000 miles into Soviet territory. The Soviet Union had lost 4.5 million soldiers killed, wounded, or captured, approximately 15,000 tanks, approximately 100,000 artillery pieces. The Germans stood 15 miles from Moscow. They had not won, but the cost of stopping them had been measured in millions of lives. Historians estimate that the military failures of 1941, the failures of preparation, of intelligence, of command, added between 1 and 2 years to the war. Every additional year of war on the Eastern Front cost approximately 5 million lives. Could the war have been shorter? Could the casualties have been lower? Could the outcome have been the same at a fraction of the human cost? These questions cannot be answered with certainty. History does not run controlled experiments. But the historical record allows for specific observations. If Tukhachevsky had not been shot, the Red Army that faced Germany in 1941 would have been commanded by the man who had studied German doctrine and built Soviet deep battle theory to counter it. Whether that army would have stopped the initial German advance cannot be known. What can be said? It would have been more capable than the army that existed. If Stalin had accepted the British-French alliance offer in 1939, Germany would have faced the prospect of a two-front war from the beginning. Whether Hitler would have invaded Poland regardless is a question that cannot be answered. What can be said? Every German military planner had identified a two-front war as potentially fatal. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact removed that constraint. If Stalin had acted on the 84 intelligence warnings, the Soviet Air Force, dispersed before June 22nd, would not have lost 4,000 aircraft in the first week. Soviet ground forces, placed on alert, would not have been caught in their barracks. The catastrophic encirclements of the first months, in which entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed, required German forces to move faster than Soviet command could react. A prepared Soviet force moves the point at which German forces can be stopped further west, earlier in the campaign. Further west means less Soviet territory occupied. Less territory occupied means fewer civilians under German control. Fewer civilians under German control means fewer of the 13.7 million dead. The answer to the question in our title, did Stalin make World War II worse than it had to be, is not a verdict on Stalin as a human being. History is not a courtroom. The answer is an observation about decisions and their costs. Stalin made decisions. He shot the commanders who had built his army. He signed the pact that freed Hitler's western flank. He ignored the warnings that the attack was coming. He paralyzed Soviet response in the first days of the war. Each decision had a cost. The cost was measured in years. The cost was measured in territory. The cost was measured in millions of lives. Soviet soldiers who died in encirclements that better prepared forces might have escaped. Soviet civilians who lived under German occupation because German forces had advanced further and faster than they needed to. This is what the history of 1932 to 1941 shows. Not that Stalin wanted the war, not that Hitler is absolved of anything, but that the road Hitler traveled was partly cleared by the man who was supposed to block it. September 1, 1939. Germany invades Poland. The war begins. But the decisions that shaped how that war would be fought, how long it would last, how far it would spread, how many people would die, those decisions were not made on September 1st. They were made earlier, in Moscow, by a man who was not Hitler. World War II is not the story of one decision. It is the story of many decisions made by many people in many countries over many years. Each decision had a cost. Understanding those decisions, who made them, why they made them, and what the cost was, is the only way to understand the war itself. That is what this channel exists to do. Subscribe, turn on notifications. In the next video, we continue.
I want to be honest with you. This video was harder to write than most. Stalin provokes strong reactions. Some of you will say I'm defending Hitler by criticizing Stalin. I am not. Hitler started the war. Hitler signed the death warrants. Nothing in this video changes that. But history is not a competition between villains. One man's guilt does not reduce another man's responsibility. In my opinion, Stalin did not just kill soldiers. When he purged his officers' corps, he killed the institutional knowledge of how to fight the war that was coming. And the people who paid for that decision were not Stalin. They were the soldiers in the encirclements, the civilians in the villages. A system that punishes honesty eventually loses the ability to hear the truth. That is not unique to Stalin. It is one of the most consistent patterns in the history of catastrophe. Three things. First, institutions take decades to build and months to destroy. Second, short-term decisions produce long-term consequences no one can control. Third, a leader who cannot be told truth is not powerful. He is blind. I want to end with one image. The columns of Soviet prisoners marching into captivity in the opening weeks of the invasion. Hundreds of thousands of men stretching to the horizon. They did not make the decisions we discussed today. They showed up, they fought with the army they were given. And millions of them didn't come home, not for what they did, for what the government decided. That is the cost of every decision, not paid by the person who makes it. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye bye.